Thank you so very much. So welcome everybody. I know people will be joining us in the next few minutes, but we have a little bit of sort of housekeeping things that we normally do. So we'll just go ahead and get started with them. Thanks so much for coming to this session. My name is Nika Hogan, and I just had this idea after our session last week. We did some really nice talking about what are the practices that we have developed during this COVID time and fully remote teaching? What are some of the practices that we're going to keep? And it really got my juices flowing. And I thought, well, let's have next week be about following up on some of the ideas, ways that we get students engaged in talking in the online setting. So this is a first run of this particular talk. And so I look forward to working with you on thinking through these ideas. So good morning again. Thanks so much. My colleagues just put back in the chat that we've got an overview of these equity in action praxis sessions is the first link, and community agreements are the second link. So for the first one, I just wanted to kind of orient you. These sessions are our way, 3CSN's way of inviting everybody to share work that you are doing to make equity real in your context. And so we want them to be informal. We want them to be inviting. We want you to think about what you would like to share. And what we do is we take about 20 minutes to share some framing thoughts, something that we're doing, something that we've tried, or just a way that we're thinking about things, how we're trying to make equity real. And then we have time for small group conversation, and then we come back as a whole group and just sort of collect some common thoughts. So it's 1 hour, kind of a hit and run, and we really welcome you and invite you to be in touch with us about work that you would like to share as well. So on that first link in the chat, you can see the list of the upcoming Praxis sessions. That second link is the community agreements document. And if you click on that, you can see that we have a list of agreements that we have generated over the more than a year that we've been online and doing these, excuse me, doing these kinds of sessions. And I just want to invite you to take a moment to look them over. So I actually should probably share my screen with that. Are we looking at that now, the community agreements? Or am I still showing my PowerPoint?
We're looking at the
We see the community agreement.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you so much. I didn't have faith in my Zooming. So let me just give you a minute or two to look these over. And I want to invite you to add in the chat anything that you really want to. Yes, absolutely, Linda, you can share with colleagues all of this stuff. Everything is pretty much an invitation in 3CSN all the time. Take a moment, look over these community agreements. If there's anything that's really speaking to you today or anything you want to kind of add on to, go ahead and add it into the chat. I'll just give you a minute for that. I'm not seeing any additions or amplifications, which is fine. Many of us have looked at those community agreements many times. And so even though I'm going to give a little presentation in the beginning, I'm still going to ask for your participation. So it's important that we sort of agree that we're going to create this safe space so that we actually can just kind of dive in and share ideas with colleagues who are new to us from across the state. So the first moment that I want to ask you to engage is right now. I just wanted you to think about what is one way that you've innovated in this past year. I want to give us a couple minutes to think about this. You might think about something about how you worship, about how you parent, how you exercise, how you teach, how you learn, how you make art, how you engage in your hobbies. What's one thing that you have done? And I just want to invite you to put that in the chat. And I'm going to give us a couple of minutes to do that and to watch the chat and see each other's. Yeah. It does make you think about multitasking. I'm looking at Christina's. We used to say, okay, there's no such thing as multitasking. You're just doing different things really quickly, switching. And I do believe that's what the brain researchers have told us. But I don't know. Sometimes I think now with the amount of Zooming while also doing other things, maybe our brains are changing to do to do more things. Well, thank you so much for sharing. I want to just kind of everybody be grounded in the fact that we have been innovating like crazy. We have been trying so many things, and just kind of to have some pride in that and take encouragement from that, as well as always thinking about what we could do differently. Okay, oops. So what I wanted to do today, and I'm going to move quickly because this is not meant to be a ton of talk. There's meant to be time for you to talk in small groups. I just wanted to review the importance of talking to active and equitable learning environments. And when I say talk, I really do mean actually just communicate. It doesn't have to be verbal or oral. It could be writing, as far as I'm concerned. It could be just any way that participants can express their ideas, their questions, their confusions, their insights, their contributions. Interrogate why it's so hard. So I'm going to first just make the case. You probably don't need me to, but I'm going to do it anyway. Why it is that we really do have to set up learning environments that are driven by students' talk. And then a little bit of why is that so hard? Why does it not seem like it works very well? Why is this a more arduous and difficult way? I want us to consider that together, and then just kind of offer some thoughts for how we can frame our efforts and innovations going forward. Okay, so why is my, it's like not moving and then I go it too far. Okay, so why talking? Why is it important to focus on talking? So 2 reasons. One is because that's how learning works. And also, as kind of like a subcategory of that's how learning works, that's how culturally responsive teaching works. So if we're looking to set up active and equitable learning environments, this is what we want to do. So at this point, I want to share a different page of resources from what we've shared so far. So if you go ahead and click on that link that I just put in the chat, you will see a list of different links that will support today's talk. And I want to ask you to click on the one that's called Talking to Learn. I'm just going to give you a minute to do that. So click on the link that's in the chat, and then click on the one that's called Talking to Learn. And this is a resource from our colleagues at UC Berkeley. They created a program that you may have heard of. It's called Transforming STEM Teaching Faculty Learning Program. And it's something that they have developed and offered at scale with the support of National Science Foundation funds. And 3CSN has collaborated with them in order to offer this learning community sometimes. And so they created this resource because their work started at Berkeley. And so they're trying to reach Berkeley professors, scientists, really, like heavy duty researchers. And so they're using the brain-based research for how learning works in order to help make the case for their colleagues to start to adopt active learning strategies. So when you look at this brain-based research, if you look at that resource, Talking to Learn, there's a lot to explore there, and I will invite you to explore it more at your leisure. But if you just kind of glance through there, you can see how, in order to take in new information, the brain needs us to do certain things. And so many of those things are about talk or sharing your ideas in some other way. So just a couple of ways of thinking about it. We need to externalize. It's not enough. And you know this from your experience. You read and you're kind of like, And then the next day, somebody asked you what you read and you're like, I don't know. You didn't make it your own. You didn't somehow like do something with that new knowledge and get it down either by taking some notes or talking to somebody about it. So we need to externalize. And that kind of goes along with articulating. If we kind of put it in our own words, put it in our own frame of understanding, we need to articulate new concepts and new knowledge to make them our own. And we need to be able to elaborate on those things. So all of these things are supported through talk or writing. Otherwise, expressing our ideas about something. So then The other thing about brain-based learning is that it's not just about doing these sort of like what we think of as intellectual or academic things. It's also about the emotional. It's also about the social. And this is where you've got the resource as well on your handout, How People Learn Too, which is where the neuroscientists and brain-based researchers came together and made a whole a whole book based on their findings. So they did How People Learn 1 in, I think it was 2010. And then, and that was all of what they knew at that point, all of the neuroscience about how learning works. And then they realized that they really needed to explore more the role of culture. And so, but in 2018, they came out with How People Learn Too, which gets into all of this research and theory about culture. And so this is one of their findings. All learners grow and learn in culturally defined ways and in culturally defined contexts. And then another finding is that the motivation to learn and to engage is all about belonging. And so this brings us to culturally responsive teaching. And the next links on your handout are sort of like the source documents for this information, which my colleague Lauren Service actually gathered for a different talk that we were working on together. So thank you, Lauren. But these are some of the ideas, about culturally responsive teaching. Again, this is what the brain-based research now proves to us, but people have been knowing this and saying this for a long time, even without studying the insides of our brains. Culture is central to learning, communicating, receiving information, shaping our thinking, those processes of elaboration and articulation. And so a pedagogy that acknowledges and responds to culture is going to be a more equitable pedagogy. And it's going to need to, sorry, I don't mean to make you dizzy. It's going to need to take into account students' cultural backgrounds. And so some of the characteristics of culturally responsive teaching are listed here on this slide. I'll just give you a moment to take a look at them. And again, you've got the source if you want to read more about these points. I'm just moving really quickly here. But I want to point to that last piece, the teacher as facilitator. So rather than the teacher as the holder of all knowledge, the teacher as the facilitator of learning experiences. So this is where I want to kind of just take a pause, because a lot of times when we start talking about culturally responsive or relevant pedagogy, people have a couple of reactions. The first one is, I can't learn about all those cultures. This is completely overwhelming. I mean, I'm in Los Angeles County. Like, what the heck? How am I going to know about all of my students? How could I ever hope to? And we teach college. We're not in like a neighborhood. People are coming from everywhere. So we just have to kind of slow down here, and we have to understand that that's not the point. Because when we're thinking, I mean, yes, absolutely, we should educate ourselves to the degree that we can always. No doubt about that, for sure. But it's not about us knowing everything about everybody else in order to perfectly tailor our curriculum and our instruction to those cultures. Because guess what? When we do that, we're keeping ourselves at the center. We're thinking of ourselves still as the one source in that room. And the whole idea actually is that everybody in the room, oh crap, sorry, my computer just, are you still seeing the slides? Because I'm not. I'm so sorry.
Yes, they're fine.
Okay, I'm just gonna have to get back to where I can see them because my computer, I don't know what to do, Keelan. I've lost my Google Chrome.
Oh, okay. Maybe I hit escape, maybe?
I did. Yeah, I don't know. I got some kind of notification and it popped me out of I'm so sorry. I was just on a roll. I'm seriously like, I don't know what to do.
Alt tab. Is it a Mac or a PC?
It's a Mac.
Nika, try to 4-finger swipe.
To which way?
To the left, from right to left.
Yep, it's not working. Ah, there we go. I did it the other way. Thank you so much. Thank
Yay.
you so much for
You have actually embodied, Nika,
yes,
what you
this
were
is
talking about.
exactly. That's what I'm saying. And hello, Saoirse. This is exactly what I'm saying. You know, this is the we need each other. You know, we all are sources of vast knowledge, and that is where the culturally responsive or the community responsive pedagogy comes from. So I have an anecdote about this that I told in a different talk, which is one time when I was teaching English 1A, I think we were discussing the movie Crash. This was back when that was an Oscar hit. And we were just talking about a lot of, you know, kind of highly charged cultural issues. And one of my students, who was an immigrant, started talking about his experience in his native country of Indonesia. And he was in the US as a refugee, and he was an ethnic minority in Indonesia, and he had suffered great pain, violence, theft, disenfranchisement over generations. And then there was another student who said, I'm from Indonesia. But this student was an international student who was from the majority ethnic group and didn't have any knowledge of what the other student was talking about. And so there's this kind of weight that descends upon the group because we're seeing this meeting in real time. It's like crackling. So this is very tense because one person is basically saying, huh, what's that? Oppression in Indonesia? I never heard about that. And here's the oppressed person shaking. It's like, wow, you know? So is my vast knowledge about Indonesia going to be the thing that's going to guide me as an instructor in this situation? I don't think so. You know, it's not about what I know. It's really about what have we done in this classroom so far that makes it even remotely safe for this discussion to proceed any further. So that's, to be culturally responsive is not that you know everything and that you have all the answers. It's that you are creating a space where it is reasonable for adults to share and take it from there, and that you have some moves, you know, you have some game and you have some plan for facilitating discussion. Okay, so the other thing that a lot of times people feel or think when the idea of culturally responsive pedagogy is introduced is, well, I'm not a humanities professor, so it's not going to work for me. And for this, I have an anecdote about my colleague Lilith, who teaches physics. And I had the privilege of sitting in on her physics class to observe it and understand her efforts better for like a whole year. And she would understandably feel stressed sometimes that I was observing, because she knew that I was looking for these kinds of active and equitable learning environment things. And she would feel like, oh, you know, I'm not going to meet your expectations because I have too much content to cover. I need to get through these concepts in physics. So this one day she says to me, you know, going in like, I don't know how to, you know, address the personal dimension in physics. There's no personal dimension in physics. And then that day when she was doing something that had to do with like projectile, like, you know, when you shoot an object across, you know, and I don't know, these physics concepts. And she just asked, you know, she asked the class about their prior knowledge. You know, what do you already know about this concept? And somebody raised their hand and said, well, I know that when you shoot a rifle, it will tend to the left, or something along those lines. And she just took a moment to pause and say, oh, are you a sportsman or military? And he said, I'm a Marine. And everybody in the class just like looked, because you just didn't kind of read that guy as a Marine. And it was like, it was this sort of humanizing moment where people saw each other a little bit, and then people started to offer other things that they knew about this concept from their various experiences. And it was like the personal dimension is in physics because you teach humans in physics, so your content might not lend itself. Sure, you might not be able to do, like in English, we can say, oh, how, our authors might be from, representing different cultural backgrounds. And that's a really cool thing that you might not be able to do in math or STEM. But it's not about that content, again, because it's not about your expertise that you're teaching. It's about the people that are in the room. So this is what I'm trying to say. If you teach humans, if you want them to learn, we have to let them talk and we have to listen to what they're saying. Okay, so what are some of the ways that we can do that? We have discussion when we are live. We have discussion forums when we are asynchronous. There's always pair or small group work. And there are other ways of asking for participant feedback or reaction or learning, such as an exit ticket, like tell me something you got out of today's class before you leave, or clickers, sometimes people do, polls, other kinds of formative feedback. Now, so Marcial, that's exactly where we're headed. I want to invite you to look at the resource on your Google Doc that is called Active Learning in Online Modalities. So this is just like all of the different options that we have. I didn't even want to begin to attempt to list them all because I can't, with the Flipgrid and the Loom and, Padlet and so many different ways of eliciting talk and getting people to talk. So the question is, you're such an awesome audience. You're exactly keep demonstrating my point or asking the question exactly as I get to it. Why is it so hard? Why is it so hard to let people talk and to have that truly drive, the learning experience? And as Marcial says in the chat there, getting students to talk in class takes half a semester. What are some easy ways to get them to talk in front of the class? So that's exactly what this is about. And I want you all to have time to talk about it in breakout rooms, because again, I'm not the one who has all of the answers. You all have so much experience and expertise that the point of this session is to get you in rooms to start talking about it, and then we'll come back together. However, I do want to just offer a couple framing thoughts about why is it so hard? Why is it so difficult? This is a point I've made before. I'm just going to keep on making this point. It's about engagement. Empathy is the key to engagement. So when you are setting up, when you're designing activities and learning environments, again, it's not about, I encourage you not to think about your expertise as the content expert. You have that, you are that. Of course, that's critical. But when we're talking about this, how do we design for engagement? You're thinking like you're using the expertise as a designer of learning experience. So think about this. A child cannot be taught by anyone who despises him, and a child cannot afford to be fooled. This is also the point that I make repeatedly. Is it reasonable in your class to risk putting yourself out there by speaking or by writing down your ideas and posting them to a discussion forum? Is it a reasonable risk? How have you set things up so that it is a reasonable risk? So again, this is all, it starts to sound woo-woo, but it's all about the brain, actually. When we know this, I'm just putting this up here, but I know that we know this already. If we can't relax, if we don't feel safe, we will not engage. This is true of our students, and it is just as true of us. You're about to have the opportunity to engage, and you're going to decide, do you feel comfortable doing so? Is this a reasonable ask of you to go into small groups in a moment and share? If so, why? What makes it so? So some of the things that we can do We can establish community agreements. We can say up front, here's the ground rules for this group. And it's not to say that people will necessarily always follow those ground rules, but at least we have something to go back to and say, you know what, this is not, we agreed it was going to be like this, or to negotiate. You know what, I know we said this, but I'm finding that I need it to be this other thing. At least some way to make transparent what those rules of engagement are so that people can reasonably know what to expect and participate. Establishing discourse routines, like in the reading apprenticeship community, we do a lot of thinking aloud, we do a lot of metacognitive logs. We try to create routines where, you're putting your thoughts down on paper, you're sharing them, and we do it all the time. Practice makes perfect. A lot of times instructors try something and it's a big flop, and then it's like, oh Lord, and you just stop doing that because it was very painful for everybody. But in truth, a second date is always better than the first. Sometimes people snicker at that one. How about actually, if you have a little kid, the second play date is always better than the first, for the kids and the parents. It's just easier to go at it again. Practice makes perfect. And then discussion protocols, a lot of times, it's really important to establish, what is the role? How's this going to work? And what you can do as the facilitator of the learning, as the teacher, is you can take on the role of being the bossy pants, who's like, no, you talk, no, now you listen, now you talk. And it can feel oppressive sometimes, but what it can do actually is relieve some of the social pressure. It's really hard to meet somebody and get into a conversation with them and also kind of be a guiding force. This is not the easiest thing. Okay, so discussion protocols can really help. And there's another resource on your page about designing equitable group work. And so the other final thing I just want you to think about is, does the engagement matter? Is anybody listening? When you ask people to talk or to write, is anybody listening and doing something with that, or reading and responding to that? Is it clear and transparent, how this fits in and how it's going to be assessed? Again, making the rules of engagement transparent. And is it worth engaging in? Is it a meaty enough question? Is it worthy of group work and collaborative work? So with those questions in mind and with that framework in mind, what I would like to do is invite you to go into breakout rooms for about 15 minutes. And I haven't made the breakout rooms, but maybe Keelan, you have. You probably are on top of that. Yes, you have. And I want you to kind of discuss what are some of the things that you have been doing in order to make talk or participants' engagement, talk, writing, all of the above, little videos, whatever it is. How have you been making it work? And then when we come back, we're going to put some of these ideas together and then also further discuss this framing that I have offered today. Does that feel like a clear enough directive for your group conversations?
Do you mind just repeating it one more time?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I would like to do is offer you space in your small groups to talk about what you've done, innovations that you've made. And it could be stuff that worked really well, or it could be stuff that you tried, but it didn't go well, and use those experiences as a way to kind of discuss and assess this framing that I've put on the topic. And then when we will come back together and see what we come up with as a group. Okay? Some of the things that you talked about in your breakout rooms. So the question that we really want, and I just kind of wanted to, we just kind of want to follow up on this question of how can we set up opportunities for productive discourse? And we want to hear about how you have been doing that. So
okay, I'll go first and tell what my people said because I took notes. Diana said something really great about introducing themselves and telling what they need. as students go around the room, I guess, and of course, during lockdown, it's more difficult because some people don't even show up to the Zooms. But and then Lucia, she said that there are a lot of expectations on faculty, and that we need to remove a lot of those barriers and those expectations. And she can maybe fill in what I'm not saying. She said it's a collective responsibility for student success. And I thought, yeah, that's so true. And that families need to be supportive, maybe turn off the TV, or make a little section in the house where that student can get his or her work done, have some structure at home, and study skills. And and I talked about how online, because I took a class at Mount SAC in student success. So I put a little email out called My Struggle. And I told about my struggle going to college, how, I was really poor, and my parents didn't, even in high school and junior high, they never helped us with our homework. They didn't care. You just came home. That was it. And so when I grew up and went to college, it was just all on me. But for my students, I tell them, tell your family that you need to have a desk or a section of a desk just for yourself where nobody can touch your books. And I ask them, how many of you have your own desk? And how many of you know your local library where you could go study? And so we talk about it. And then I also have a video on YouTube called Trust the Process, which helps them with their writing. So I don't want to take up all the time.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing, though. Yes, and I really love the point about modeling and sharing your own struggles and your own passions and just yourself as a person. I think a lot of times we can lead the way for making it reasonable for students to share themselves if we share ourselves as well. Thank you so much, Marcial, for sharing. What were some of conversations in other groups that we can hear about? And if we want to just kind of, with limited time, please feel free to share a specific strategy that you have used, or a specific idea that you have now that maybe you haven't tried yet, based on the thinking and talking this morning. How have you supported students talk? Go ahead, Melanie.
My partner Edward talked about how he'll explicitly tell the group that they're not recording as a way to let them know that this is a pretty safer space for them to share. It's not like anything's going to be recorded or distributed. And I'm going to use that tomorrow.
That's a great suggestion. Yes, 100%. Thank you so much for sharing. Other suggestions, ideas? Go ahead, Tiffany.
Linda was talking about how she specifically reached out to students and asked, is there anything that you need from me? Is there anything that I can do? And letting them know that she's really rooting for them personally. And that made me think of this semester I had a few students who never turned on their cameras in the whole group. But I noticed they turned them on in the breakout rooms. And so I invited them just to a one-on-one meeting with me, and we talked, and they turned on their cameras in the one-on-one meeting with me. And I asked them, how can I help you to be more like there in the whole group? What would make you more comfortable? And they said, oh, in our culture, we just need to be invited. I can't volunteer. It would be against like what would be polite for me. And so I was like, oh, so I just need to invite you. And are you comfortable with me inviting you anytime? And they said, oh, of course. Yes. So now I just call on them all the time. And it's really nice to be able to have those one-on-one meetings with students. I feel like it's a little easier remotely than it is sometimes in a face-to-face class.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. That's such a great example of how we just have to ask, we just have to ask, because, a lot of us have a presumption as equity-minded facilitators, we think, well, I don't call on people, because we know that there's plenty of people who have trauma of being called on and put on the spot. But that's an assumption, and so it's just, this is just another demonstration of, we have to get people talking, because otherwise we cannot know. That's the only way to know. The only way to know what's going on with folks is to ask. Thank you so much. Any other things that came up that haven't sort of been touched on yet?
Hi, Nika. This is Kendrick. And me and Christina were in a group, and one of the things that we were talking about was connecting with the students on their level in terms of their references that they could understand, cultural references. Because a lot of, I said this in our group, that sometimes students think that as educators or faculty, we kind of hatched out and we're just there, right? They seem to not think that we grew up and had experiences and we're into pop culture, maybe not the same pop cultural references that they may understand. Like I understood the reference that you made about that movie, right? That was like in 2000, and some kids were not even born that time. So, but when I talk about gaming, like I was a PlayStation 1 gamer way back when, and they understand that PlayStation. So then it gets them to talk a little more, or see us as faculty members that we're not only just approachable, but we were once in their place sitting there, and we had questions growing up. So that's something that is relevant to the openness of discussion. Right?
Thank you for sharing, Kendrick. You're reminding me, I have this plan that I haven't pulled it off yet, but I want people to understand the concept of discourse mismatch, and how, so often people think our students are not ready, but in fact, they're perfectly ready. They're just not familiar with the discourse that we're using, the language and the practices. So I kind of want to sneak up on my kid and record him when he's talking about his video games, because it is such an insular and particular discourse that he's using when he talks about either Pokemon or Animal Crossing or Splatoon. And I don't understand a word he's saying. And I just feel like that's a great example for instructors and for students, that we all have insider discourse. And we can help each other recognize that. It's not a matter of being clueless or not ready. It's just a matter of being insider or outsider. Go ahead, Michelle, your hand is up.
Yes, I just want to share from in our group. It actually, we talked about some cultural, just to kind of feed off what someone had shared earlier. But culturally, culturally, at least for me, I'll speak for me, but I know this also resonated with some others, but you don't speak until you're spoken to. But like you said, some people have been traumatized by being called on, because I, for one, was someone that was quiet. And so some people don't like to be put on the spot, but what I've seen as effective is kind of like a group reflection, allowing people, the whole group, inviting the whole group to process and reflect on a question that's being posed to the entire group. And then having a time, then to be able to share it in, whether it be, out loud or, through the chat, if it is virtual. Mm-hmm. The other piece is that culturally, I know for me, there's just this respect for authority, mm-hmm. a respect for teachers. So when the teacher is speaking, you're silent. You don't challenge or question the teacher. They are the authority. So that's a lot of the reason I, for one, was quiet in the classrooms, because I was just told just to listen to whatever the teacher says, because they are correct. And so who are you to question them or to challenge their authority? And the other thing is that, kind of going along with that is that when you speak out, the spotlight is being put on you. So I'm totally out of my, I'm out of my comfort zone. Mm-hmm. And so when you have the spotlight on yourself, you're being selfish, you're being self-absorbed, and it's all about the group and listening to what other people have to say.
Thank you so much. So we were at the end of our time, and I want to be respectful. It is 11 o'clock right now. So I just want to leave us all with two things. One is an invitation. We would love to hear from you. I'm Nika at 3csn.org, Nika at 3csn.org. We'd love to hear from you. What are some of the innovations that you have used? Would you love to do a session and share some of the good work you've done and have a discussion like this one in this community? So that's the invitation. And then the question just to keep in mind and to take with you is, what are you doing from your position of authority? What are you doing to make it a reasonable risk for students to share themselves? And what more could you do? So I'll leave you with that. And thank you so much for coming today. And just before you leave, don't forget to check out the chat. There have been some wonderful contributions there as well, in addition to our verbal sharing. So I hope to hear from you and hope to have to feature you in an Equity in Action Praxis session sometime soon. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you,
And
everyone.
there is
Appreciate
a
it.
survey in the chat, so please make
Thank
sure
you.
to take the survey. Thank you so much. We really appreciate your feedback.
Yes, please take the survey. Sorry about that, Keelan. Thank you.
Thank you, Nika. Thank you.